too much. Does anybody here enjoy fireworks? You got any fireworks? Yeah, okay. Like almost every male hand went up. That was a little, okay. So, well, when I was a teenager, I enjoyed fireworks. And we moved into a neighborhood, and there was a neighbor friend of mine that he enjoyed fireworks as well. And so we started making fireworks because as a teenager, we didn't have any money. So we thought, well, we could kind of manufacture our own fireworks. And so we started off with, now there's teenagers in the room, so I'm not going to say the exact ingredients. I know. All the teenagers are heckling me. All right, but I'm telling you that, I'm not going to tell you the exact ingredients, but there were two ingredients that we started with that we mixed into a Ziploc baggie. And so it was just a Ziploc baggie. We taped a fuse to it, lit the fuse, it went off, a little bang. It was fun. We did it a few times, but then it kind of got old. We're in America, right? Bigger, go big, right? So we decided, well, if it was like a little bang in a Ziploc, like a sandwich bag, what would it do in a freezer bag? And it was a bigger bang. And so one thing led to another, and then we added gasoline in the mix and some other ingredients, and eventually we realized that the biggest thing we could possibly find were those big, 50-gallon trash bags that the big gallon, So eventually we end up with this big contraption that we've now made, and it's, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet in diameter and yay tall. And we figured out a way to ignite it. And so anyhow, we're lighting this thing off, having the time of our lives until 9 police cars, 2 fire trucks, and 4 ambulances showed up. They did not call them fireworks. So this 4th of July, guys, be safe. Yeah, there was a set of unfortunate circumstances that led to a very tragic ending when I was a teenager. And thank God that all happened before I was 18. And so, because, you get kind of a new page, right? A new start in life. And so, teenagers, I don't encourage you to do that. That was very dangerous, but it was fun. So, sorry, parents. There was a set of circumstances that kind of added up to like this really tragic situation. I didn't really even realize how dangerous or tragic it was until the end when the officers were explaining to me some of the details. I'm grateful that I grew up in the time that I did, because today I think it'd be like Homeland Security would be at my door, not the local police, and there may be like domestic terrorism or something thrown in the mix, right? And we were just kids having fun, but things have changed, times have changed, and the circumstances, the unfortunate set of circumstances, although brought on by myself, led to a very scary end in this path that I was choosing. And so I just want to say that Esther was in the middle of some very unfortunate circumstances. She was in a terrible situation. Now, maybe you've never been in a terrible situation, but I've been in a few terrible situations, and most of them aren't funny, which is why I'm not going to talk about them this morning. But terrible situations happen to each and every one of us. And Esther found herself in the middle of a terrible situation. There's a few players that you need to know about if you're just catching up. You see, there was a king, King Ahasuerus, and then he had a queen named Esther. Esther had an older cousin who served as a father figure in her life because she was an orphan, and his name was Mordecai. So you have King Ahasuerus, Queen Esther, and Mordecai. Also in the mix, new to the story, is a guy named Haman. Now, Haman's a bad guy. He even sounds like a bad guy. Haman. So Haman, the bad guy, he is he's the bad guy in this story. And so what's happened up until now is, you see, Queen Esther was an orphan. Her parents died, and her older cousin Mordecai adopted her into the house. And so she gets raised by a different family now. Talk about changing everything in life. Parents are dead. Now you got a new family rules, new circumstances. You grow up. She's doing pretty well, but then the king wants a new wife, so he wants to find a new queen, because the old one, well, you'll have to read it and find out. But the old one got kicked out, and so he wants a new queen. So he starts drafting people. He's like, I want all the beautiful women. Esther's beautiful. She gets now taken from the second home that she's known, then thrust into this other situation where she is now being paraded as a potential suitor for the king, and out of many, many women. And now she's the queen, and she's got this whole situation that's been going on. Well, what's happening is that nobody knows her nationality. Nobody understands her background. She's kept silent about all those things all of these years because she has thought, and Mordecai also has told her, hey, don't expose all this stuff because this could lead to some bad situations. So here we are. Mordecai is now at the temple gate. We talked about this last week. And Haman comes walking out of the temple gate. Haman is the number 2 guy in the kingdom. And Mordecai won't bow down to Haman. Everybody else bows to Haman, but Mordecai won't bow down to Haman. And Haman gets mad. He's pretty upset. He's like, all y'all are doing it. What's up with this guy? And so he gets really angry. And he seeks to find revenge against Mordecai. And so he does a little research, and he finds out that Mordecai won't bow down to Haman because Mordecai is a Jew, and he says, my God is a higher authority in my life than natural earthly authority. You guys remember last week? Last week we said, hey, you need to be faithful to your calling. You need to be faithful to your earthly authority, but most importantly, you need to be faithful to heavenly authority. And this got Mordecai in trouble because he wouldn't bow down to this other man because he's saying, you're not God, and my God says you shall have no other gods before me. And so he's sticking to his earthly authority, or his heavenly authority, and saying, I can't bow down to my earthly authority. So then Mordecai says, well, if this guy thinks this way, I bet everybody else. Haman says, if Mordecai thinks this way, so then Haman says, well, if Mordecai thinks this way, then everybody else must be in his nationality and his religion must also believe this way. And so Haman says, all right, I'm going to make a plan to kill all of the Jews. I'm going to make a plan to kill all the Jews. So now we're all caught up, right? And so he gets the king's signature ring. He drafts a decree, and Haman takes the king's ring and with the king's permission, makes it a decree, which is irrevocable in their culture. So an irrevocable decree that says on this day of the calendar, we're going to kill all the Jews. So it's like a scheduled extermination, and anybody who wants to participate can participate. It's like a purge day of some sort. Like it's really weird, and so it's hard for us to think about it that way, but that's the way that they were thinking about it. And so all the Jews find out, they see the decree, so they know on this calendar day, everybody is going to be coming after us. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And so we're going to pick up in Esther chapter 4, verse 1. And it says, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. What is sackcloth? Sackcloth is like this tough burlappy stuff. Think like potato sack, the cloth that you would make potato sacks with. Burlap, it's thick, it's heavy. Now they use a little bit different material, but they would clothe themselves in this itchy, gross material, and then they would cover themselves with ashes. In fact, we have a picture of somebody in sackcloth and ashes, and it would look something like this. And of course, there was no photos back then. This is kind of a recreation, but they'd be covered in ash and sackcloth, and it's kind of a weird thing. Like they would cry out loudly, and they'd have bitter, like kind of this angry, bitter expression going on. And I thought, that's so weird. Like, we don't have anything like that in our culture. I mean, who would take their wardrobe and alter their entire appearance and wardrobe to reflect the inner angst and pain of what's going inside, on the side of their body? And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, there are people in our culture that do that. In fact, I got a picture of them too. And there's some inner angst and pain, and that's maybe a modern sackcloth and ash. I'm not really sure. Not very religious, though. But anyhow, moving on, we've got this outward appearance of what they're trying to express on the inward pain. So in verse 3, in chapter 4, verse 3, we can get that up there. There we go. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ash. And many of them lay in sackcloth and ash. Boy, that seems like it'd be itchy. It seems like it would be kind of gross, right? Like, and we got showers and we got modern ways to clean ourselves, but man, they'd be like dipping in the river and like trying to wash all this off. You got to be committed, like there's some inner pain. You don't just do sackcloth and ash because, somebody hurt your feelings. You do sackcloth and ash when it's like there's some hardcore mourning going on. There's some hardcore pain. There's some deep trouble. So all across the country, you see all the Jews donning this outfit, if you will, this outward expression of the pain that's going on. I can only imagine the confusion that would be going on inside of their kingdom right now. I can only imagine the what's going on, what's happening. Some of these people would be, yeah, let's kill him. And there'd be other people who would be like, why are we doing this? I bet the country was somewhat divided. Definitely divided between Jews and the people who wanted to kill the Jews. But there's probably some sort of middle ground too. Probably not too unlike our country. There seems to be a right and a left and then a middle on so many issues that we face. And so there's probably some sort of confusion, some sort of turmoil, some sort of thing going on in their country. It just takes a lot, It just takes a lot to get these guys going in sackcloth and ash, and they're there. And so Mordecai is outside the temple gate, and they won't let him in because he looks like this. And so Esther, his somewhat adopted stepdaughter, is now inside and gets word that Mordecai is now looking like this on the outside of the building. And so she sends a messenger out saying, hey, what are you doing? And so back and forth via a messenger who's walking back and forth, he explains. Mordecai says, hey, listen, this is what's going on. Here's a copy of the decree that was issued. We're all in danger. Like, everybody is in danger. Like, what's going to happen? And so they're going back and forth, and with this story. And so we're going to pick up in verse 13. So it says that all the king's servants and the people of king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death. You see, Mordecai had told Esther, you need to go into the king and intervene. Nobody else has access to the king. You got to do it. You got to get in there. And she's saying, well, if I do this, I will certainly die. That's the rule, the die. So there will be one law to be put to death, except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. And then they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. God is in control. The circumstances seemed absolutely crazy, but God was in control. They're facing imperative death. What's going to happen? But God is in control. Dale's testimony this morning when he's saying, hey, like I felt like this whole situation was wrong, but years later to discover that God was in control. You might be facing a situation today where you're saying, I don't know what's happening in my life. This whole thing seems totally mixed up and upside down. But I want to say that God is in control. And although sometimes we don't see God working in a very specific way in our life or in our situation, God is working in your life and in your situation. You see, God is in control and will ultimately bring his plans to pass. We can either be used by him as part of the solution, or we could watch him use someone else. Esther had that choice. She could be used by God in that situation, or she could wait it out and see God use somebody else. But who knows what would have happened in the meantime? God's main purpose is not our comfort. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes I forget that. Sometimes I think, man, this isn't very comfortable for me, God. I don't like this, God. It hurts. God, I don't want to do this. Well, why is this the options? Why can't you just rescue me from this situation? And then I start quoting every Bible story that I've ever studied, and I start speaking in tongues, and I start praying, and I start doing all these other things saying, God, rescue me from this situation. But you see, God sometimes isn't trying to just cater to our comfort. He's trying to accomplish his purposes. See, God's main purpose is not our comfort. God's main purpose is his glory. His glory is the most important thing, which means our comfort comes secondary. And as Americans, that's hard to grasp sometimes because we want it to be about our comfort. It's hard for us to imagine that. our comfort is not God's main concern. I mean, really, when you follow that logic down, it turns into, well, God's a genie in the bottle, and when I rub that bottle, he comes out, he grants me a wish, and goes back in the bottle because he's the all-powerful God. But when we start continue chasing this path of like he's out for our comfort, ultimately that turns into, well, God is going to do what I say, which means I'm God and he's my slave. And when you read the Bible, it's actually the other way around. You see, he's God, and we belong to him. He doesn't belong to us. God is always in control, even though you don't see it. And he calls us to be able to go along the ride with him. See, he has chosen to show his glory through people. See, God wanted to bring salvation to the Jews through Esther. God wanted Esther to be the vehicle by which he brought salvation to his people. God's strategy hasn't changed that much because he still wants to bring his salvation to people through you. If you're a believer here this morning, God wants to use you to bring his salvation to people. He wants to use you to be able to witness to others. He wants to use you to pray for people. He wants to use you to accomplish his purposes. In thousands of years, not much has changed in the world. Not much has changed in God's kingdom. She had to risk something. She had to risk position. The last queen that upset the king got kicked out, got banished from his presence, got kicked into the ex-girlfriend house. It was awkward for everybody. But that was the last girlfriend, the last queen that really messed stuff up, got kind of kicked out of the house. And so she's realizing that I got to risk my position at the bare minimum. But then she had to risk her power. She had to risk her authority. I mean, she was the queen. When she said stuff, things happened. People jumped. She's like, oh, it's too warm, they heated it, or they cooled it down. And they said it's too cold, they heated it up. And then when she said, hey, I want you to jump, they started jumping. I mean, it was, when things happened, she had power, she had authority. She had to risk that. Sometimes God wants you to risk your power and your authority. Sometimes you got to risk your position. She had to risk her reputation. Ultimately, she had to risk her own life. She could have walked into the room and not even gotten a word out, and they might have hauled her off and killed her. Worst case scenario. There was a lot of really bad situations here, a lot of bad circumstances, a lot of potential negative outcomes that she could have had to face, and she knows, man, I've got to face this. I've got to face this. So will you risk your position, your standing? Will you risk your authority? Will you risk even maybe your life to deliver a salvation message to those around you? Esther did. And all through the Bible, you see the great heroes of the Bible are the ones that risked it all to deliver a salvation message on behalf of God. Will you risk it? Will you step out in faith? At the end of verse 13, 14, it says here that, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. For such a time as this. For such a time as this. You mean to tell me that it's possible that her parents died and left her an orphan, living in pain and anguish of not having parents so that she might be adopted by an older cousin, having to relearn a house, relearn the rules, figure out her new position in this new family, only then to be ripped away from that family, to be placed into a harem lineup that one in, what are the odds? 1 in 100, 1 in 200? How many good-looking girls were in that kingdom? I don't know. But, she's now in a lineup of hundreds, but she doesn't have the background. She doesn't have the heritage. Her last name's not the right last name. Her parents are dead. She doesn't have any of the things that kings look for when they're picking a queen. And so the odds of this are just absolutely astounding. There's no way she's going to be picked queen, but despite the odds, she got picked as queen. So you mean to say that the pain that she went through of knowing the futile act of being in a lineup that she knew was never going to go anywhere, and then all of a sudden she gets drafted and gets chosen to be the queen. Well, now she's got to learn all these queenly things. And the burden, I know it sounds like, oh yeah, the burden of being queen. Yeah, okay. Doesn't sound like that hard of a burden. But I'll tell you what, anybody who's ever been in a position of responsibility and authority in your workplace or anywhere you've been, you know that there's a pain that comes with that responsibility and a pain that comes with that privilege. And she had to endure all of that. She had to endure the weight of the responsibility of what that meant to her. You mean to say that all those things built up in her life for this? To stand before the king, maybe not even get a word out and be killed? What's the pain in your past that you've been going through? What's the journey in your life that's been adding up to such a time as this? Because your life is not pointless. The call of God in your life is for today and it's for now. It wasn't for yesterday and it's not for some time in the future. I believe that God has a call on every person's life for such a time as this. Who's in your midst? What's your circle? Where's your influence? God has you in a place right now for such a time as this. This is your time. This is your time. Turn to your neighbor and say, this is my time. That's right. This is your time. This is my time. And so here we go as we keep going, and now we're in verse 15. It says, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it's against the law, and if I perish, well, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. What's up with fasting and prayer? How is me getting hungry going to make this situation any better? Because I don't know about you, but I don't get hungry, I get hangry when I get hungry. You know, like, if anything, I'm less godly when I don't eat. You know, yeah, you got a couple nods in here, right? You know what I mean? Like, I get less godly. Like, well, God, you want me to not eat and then be godly? Are you kidding me? God, that's like the opposite of the way I think that I work. So, no, God, I don't know if I really want to fast and pray. I mean, can I just pray? Maybe I'll just fast my cell phone. That seems good, right? Yeah. You know, fasting, biblical fasting is no food. And if it's an extended time, it's also no water. So 3 days, right? Is that what they said? 3 days? 3 days, no food, no drink. So if you're not going to have food or water for 3 days, it means you got to plan a few things out. Just logically. I think like kind of structure, logical. Well, gee, if I'm not going to have food or water, especially not water, you know, I probably shouldn't be going outside in the sun. I'm not going to be working because if I start to work, I'm going to be sweating and losing the water quickly. And then I'm going to get dehydrated, and then I'm going to get cramps. And then my hanger is going to hit a whole new level, right? So I would plan things out like that. And so these guys probably got to plan some things out. How many of you guys are planners? You got some planners in the room? Okay, half of you guys are planners. The other half of you are like living in the moment. Who's a live in the moment guy? Yeah, fasting when you live in the moment sometimes can end, maybe not in that most ideal situation, but these guys sound like planners to me, and especially if your life is on the line. And so they're gonna fast and pray. So they're probably planning for this thing. They're like, okay, well, if we're gonna fast and pray, then wow, we need to make a few changes to our lifestyle. So think about this. They're not going to work, more than likely, or at least they're taking it easy. Their stomachs are gonna be grumbling on a fairly regular basis. And so when you're fasting and praying, every time that you start thinking about, man, I'm kind of thirsty. Boy, I'm kind of hungry. Oh, that's right, because I'm fasting and praying. Rumble and the tumble equals I start praying. Rumble and the tumble, a little bit of prayer. I feel a little parched, a little bit of prayer. I'm not going to be running around and taking it as active as I normally do. I'm going to kind of live in a reserved mode because I'm going to be spending my time in prayer. It kind of like forces you in a way, when you start fasting in prayer, it kind of forces you to take things back a notch, forces you a second to be more introverted. And what it ultimately is you are denying your flesh, the human side of you. And when you're praying, you are feeding your spirit side of you. Because inside we have both of these like sides of us. We have like a flesh and a spirit. And so when you starve something and then you feed something, here's what happens. See, when you feed something, it grows. And when you starve something, it dies. Think about it. In your garden, if you feed something, it grows. And if you starve something, it dies. And so when you start starving your flesh and feeding your spirit, it starts opening yourself up into a place where you can hear God speak in a whole new way. And you start praying the prayers that God wants you to pray. And you start hearing the voice of God. I believe God is speaking all the time. But sometimes we have so much noise in our life, we just can't hear him. Fasting is a way for us to shut off the noise in our life. Turn off your cell phone. Turn off the TV. You know, people say, oh, well, I'm just going to fast electronics. No, you need to be fasting too, food too. You know, like there's a whole package here. Now, I think in the Bible, if they'd had all these electronic gadgets, they would have said, we're going to fast food, electronics, iDevices, whatever you might have. I mean, they cut back on what you feed yourself, your flesh side, and start feeding your spirit side. And so they need some wisdom. They're about to enter into some crazy, crazy times. And so they need some wisdom. So during a season of difficulty, take time to fast and pray. And if you're facing a big difficulty, ask some of your friends to fast and pray with you. Ask them to hear the voice of God. Ask them to hear what God is saying, listening for God's direction. Fasting and praying seems so counterintuitive because your body's not interested in hearing from God. And your flesh is not interested in hearing from God, but your spirit is. So you kind of got to intentionally rise above your flesh and say, flesh, no, spirit, yes. Some of you, I think there's somebody here, in preparing this, I feel like there's going to be somebody here this morning that you're facing a very critical decision, a very tough situation. And I want to encourage you, take a couple days and fast and pray. Cut some stuff out of your life. Starve your flesh and spend that extra time in your day feeding your spirit. Seek the Lord on what you might have to do. Seek God on what might have to be done in your life. I honestly believe it. I mean, there's times in the day and the week where I know I hear God's voice louder than others. And I know when I was preparing this part of the message, I know there's somebody here today that needed that. So fast and pray when you're seeking wisdom from the Lord. God is always speaking. Sometimes we're not always listening. When you deny your flesh and open your spirit to God, you remove barriers for you to hear his voice. You know, Esther wasn't a perfect person. In fact, when you look at her background, you can see all these crazy flaws. Most of the time when people married in that day, there would be like wedding presents from the families that would kind of come together to make a wedding happen. Maybe a dowry involved or something like that. She wouldn't have had any of that because her family was gone. You know, she had all kinds of background issues that tainted her ability to be queen. She didn't have all the stuff necessary to be able to do what God was calling her to do. Esther wasn't a perfect person, but God used her anyway. God used her anyway. So don't feel you're disqualified from being used by God because of your flaws. If the band would come, we're going to wrap up right now. You know, preparing this, I was just really thinking about how do you show this in a very tangible and easy way? And so last week I had 10,000 pennies, and when we dumped them out on a table, that was fun, and it was loud. But this week I only have 2 coins. In fact, they're both $1 coins from the 1970s, so they're the big $1 coins. And although you may not be able to see it from your seat, one of them is fairly clean and new, pretty looking, and the other one is a little bit older. It's a little bit tarnished. And so regardless of, you know, I think they're minted right around the same era. In fact, the dirty one is younger than the clean one. And so the younger one has got more, like, I don't know, maybe abuse on it through life. It's got some issues, you know, and it's got some dirt and some grime, and it's not as pretty as this coin here. But, you know, sometimes in life, we find ourselves in a place where mistakes happen. you find yourself in an awkward situation. Whether you're making homemade fireworks and breaking the law, and it's all brought on by your own stupid actions, if I may, or if it's outside of your control and it's nothing that you've done at all to bring on this sort of terrible situation in your life. You know, we all have a past. We all have things that have happened to us. And so what happens is we got the nice, pretty clean coin, but when you take the other coin and, it kind of, look, it fell in some mustard, And so it fell in some mustard. Let's see what happens here. Oh, man. Okay. So it got kind of gross, You fall into some yuckiness in your life, and it's happened, and then, oh, no, you fall into some dirt. And this is dirt from my backyard. And so now, oh, man, this is really gross. Like, this, I don't even want to touch this coin because of where it's been. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely not something I would put in my pocket. It's not something I want to carry around. It's not something that I really want to use. I'm not going to stick this in my jeans pocket. Could you imagine? It's gross, right? That'd be nasty. You don't want to do that. But see, in life, sometimes we get stuck in areas where maybe it is a direct sin and you've done something specifically that got you caught in a situation. Or maybe somebody else did something to you and you feel like this coin. And you feel like, man, I don't think I am qualified to be in somebody's pocket right now. And then, one thing happens to another, one thing leads to another, and then you fall into the mustard again, and then you get a whole new layer of nasty. And so now you got a mustard, dirty, what is this thing? This doesn't even look like anything worth having. This doesn't even look like anything, does it? What is this, a chunk of dirt? This is gross. And then you start going through here, and here's what happens is the enemy, the devil is a liar, and he will start to tell you that your identity is based on what stuck to you. Your identity is based on what's happened to you in life, that your identity is based on what you see on the outside. And so you got stuff dripping off like I do here, and so you're getting really gunky, and you're getting really nasty, and things are getting really, really rowdy, and, so we've got this really nasty coin now. It's disgusting. It's covered in dirt. And then you look over this nice and shiny coin, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't even compare to that shiny coin. But here's what happens is in our own life, there may be somebody here this morning, and you're sitting and you're looking even across this very room or up onto this platform, and you're saying, look at all those shiny coins. If they only knew the kind of dirt that's in my life, if they only knew the kind of grime that's been stuck to me, if they only knew the kind of situations that I've been in and whatnot, come on. If you only knew. But here's the thing. They're still worth the same. Because the value of the coin is not based on what's stuck to the outside. The value of your life is not based on the dirt and grime and just the stuff that is stuck on the outside of your life. That is not the value of your life. The value of your life is determined by the Creator, the one who manufactured you, the one who manufactured this coin. They're both work exactly the same. So even if you're not a follower of Christ and you're here this morning, you are still worth something in the eyes of God. You are worth it. You are worth it. And you see, here's kind of the beautiful thing. It's that God comes along. And when you give your life to Christ, he starts cleaning you up. And you like to think it's just going to happen in a moment, right? You're just going to say a prayer this morning, and I'll give you an opportunity to give your life to Christ, but you're just going to say a prayer this morning, and instantly my life is going to be better. Well, it's not. It happens occasionally. There are times, miraculous times, when people get set free from addiction and affliction in ways that are not scientifically or medically possible. And that may be you. I don't know. But it may not. The scars and the wounds of life as it goes on, it may take God a little while to work on you and heal you through this process. He might work on a little bit at a time in your life. I don't understand the ways of God. I don't know why he miraculously heals some, and some he takes it on a lifelong journey of healing. But what I do know this is that God is in the healing business. And whether it happens in a moment or it happens in a lifetime, he starts washing away the dirt. He starts washing away the mustard. He starts washing away the things that happen in our life. He starts taking away all of the grime and all of the filth and all of the stuff. And it just sometimes feels like a little bit here and a little bit there. And in the midst of it all, you might stumble and fall back into some mustard and dirt again. But he picks you back up and starts cleaning you back off again. Because your value is not determined by the stuff stuck to the outside of your life. Doesn't matter what pit you've been in. Doesn't matter what dirt or mustard or whatever concoction's been sprayed on your life. You are worth something to God. Because he created you. He values you. And he said so. So what would it look like if we were aware of our value? What would it look like to you if you were aware of the value of your value? That still small voice that is in your head, the voice of the Holy Spirit sometimes will speak something to you and say, hey, will you pray for this person? And our natural position is to look at the dirt and grime and say, well, God, I got all this stuff on me. I'm not nearly qualified to pray for that person. But child, I made you. You have value. What would it look like if we understood our value? You know, adversity might knock you down. You might find yourself again in the mustard and the dirt, but what would it look like if we were aware of our value? As you're going to school, your bad report card wouldn't crush your value. It wouldn't destroy you. You wouldn't be saying the things that's about yourself that you say. It wouldn't knock you out. It might knock you down, but it doesn't knock you out. See, your past divorce wouldn't ruin your future. Family disagreements wouldn't ruin your relationships. Losing your job wouldn't devalue you as a person, because your value is not determined by your value is determined by your Creator. Esther's value was determined by God. And regardless of her background, regardless of her insecurities and her not knowing what would happen and surely I might die. So church, let us go out from this place knowing our value and who God has made us to be, knowing that God has made you for a purpose and maybe even for such a time as this. Let us go from this place knowing that God is in control. And we're called to such a time as this and knowing the value that God has placed on our life. So church, together, let's stand and let's sing.